you are not too much. You are also not bad at relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's the exact unvarnished message a really prominent therapy practice is using right now to just dismantle, I mean, decades of shame that people feel about their romantic and interpersonal lives.
Yeah, it's a powerful statement.
It really is. So today our mission for this deep dive is to unpack what is actually going wrong when our relationships feel just utterly impossible.
Right.
We're looking at a pretty dense but highly illuminating overview of attachment theory. And this was provided by Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC.
THC, right.
Yeah, they're a telehealth therapy practice that operates across Georgia. And our goal here is to figure out how modern, accessible therapy models are structured not just to talk about these issues, but to actively fix them.
Well, it is a remarkable starting point because it completely reorients the listener right away.
Yeah.
For anyone who's ever felt inherently flawed, like they lack some fundamental relationship gene or something.
Right, like everyone else got the manual and they didn't.
Exactly. This source material clarifies that the struggle to connect isn't a permanent flaw in your character. It is a learned biological and psychological mechanism.
Wow.
We are talking about a neurological template that you adopted early on simply to survive your specific environment.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because going from the relief of, I'm not broken, to the actual mechanics of what is happening, it requires looking at childhood development.
Yes, it does.
And the source material describes attachment insecurity as this early template we built for what it calls the cost of closeness.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read that, it made me realize that as children, connection is essentially a transactional economy.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if getting a caregiver's attention meant I had to be perfectly quiet and never ask for anything, then being quiet literally became my currency for love.
Right. And what's fascinating here is how deeply that transactional economy gets wired into the developing brain.
Okay.
Because as infants and toddlers, we are entirely dependent on our caregivers for survival. We can't do anything for ourselves.
Right.
So the brain's primary job at that stage is to run algorithms. It's asking what behaviors ensure that I am fed, protected, and noticed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if the cost of closeness was having to constantly perform to get a distracted parent's attention, the brain wires a neural pathway linking anxiety and performance to love.
So it literally hardwires that connection.
Exactly. Or on the flip side, if the cost of closeness was being overwhelmed by an unpredictable caregiver, the brain wires a pathway linking isolation to safety.
Wow.
And that early neural template becomes the invisible blueprint for every relationship you attempt to build, decades later.
And it operates entirely under the radar. I mean, I think of an attachment pattern like a background app draining your phone's battery.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. You don't see it on the screen.
No.
You just assume your phone's hardware is flawed because the battery keeps dying at like 2 p.m.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's this program running silently in the background, and it's consuming massive amounts of system resources without your conscious permission.
Right.
And you assume the exhaustion is just your personality, but it's really this hidden software.
Yes. And that distinction right there between pattern and personality is arguably the most crucial takeaway from the initial CAC overview.
Okay, why is that the most crucial?
Because when you believe your relationship struggles are due to your personality, you internalize them as fixed traits.
Right.
You think, I am just a needy person, or I am naturally cold.
Right. Like that's just who I am.
Exactly. A personality trait feels immovable.
Right.
But a pattern is a learned behavior. And neuroplasticity tells us that because these patterns shifted once when you were young to adapt to your environment.
The brain retains the mechanical ability to shift them again.
Yes, exactly. You can rewire it.
Okay, so if these are background programs running our relationships, we need to look at what the error messages actually look like in our daily lives.
Yeah, the symptoms, basically.
Right. So the source breaks down two distinct faces of this insecurity. We've got anxious patterns and avoidant patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Let's examine the anxious side first, which the text heavily characterizes by hypervigilance.
Yes.
It specifically mentions needing reassurance that you cannot quite absorb, reading tone of voice for hidden threats, and panicking at a slow reply, like a text message reply.
Right. And the mechanism driving that anxious hypervigilance is rooted deeply in the amygdala.
Which is the brain's threat detection center, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to an anxiously attached nervous system, a slow text message reply is not processed in the prefrontal cortex as, oh, my partner is busy in a meeting.
It bypasses logic completely.
Completely. It hits the primitive brain, which interprets the silence as a literal loss of connection. And in our evolutionary history, a loss of connection to the tribe meant literal death.
Wow.
So the brain dumps cortisol and adrenaline into the bloodstream.
So the panic isn't a metaphor, it's an actual physiological event.
It is a full-body response.
Right, so your partner says, I love you, but because that early template taught you that love is precarious, your nervous system just rejects the data. You can't absorb the reassurance because your brain is convinced it needs to stay on high alert to prevent abandonment.
Precisely. The anxious brain believes that if it relaxes, if it stops scanning for slight changes in tone or, tiny shifts in facial expression.
It's gonna be blindsided.
Yes, blindsided by rejection. So the exhaustion comes from the nervous system burning excessive energy, trying to predict and control the emotional environment.
Okay, so then we have the flip side of the coin, which is the avoidant patterns.
Right.
And the source outlines this as going cool when someone gets close to you, needing space that you struggle to ask for, and calling it independence when it is actually self-protection.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to push back on how our culture interprets this specific pattern.
Okay.
We heavily glorify independence.
We absolutely do.
Right. We celebrate the stoic lone wolf, the person who doesn't need anybody, the entrepreneur who's just an absolute island.
Yeah, the self-made man kind of myth.
Exactly. And I look at this source material and I wonder how often we as a society are mistaking an avoidant trauma response for someone just being strong and self-sufficient.
Oh, we do it constantly. And it reveals a massive blind spot in our cultural values.
How so?
Well, we praise emotional stoicism as a sign of resilience, but true independence actually allows for interdependence.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. True resilience includes the capacity to lean on others and regulate your nervous system through connection.
Right.
What the source is describing here, calling it independence when it is really a defense mechanism, it functions somewhat like an autoimmune disease for intimacy.
Wait, an autoimmune disease for intimacy? How so?
Okay, so think about a healthy body. The immune system attacks foreign pathogens.
Right, viruses, bacteria.
Yeah, exactly. But in an autoimmune disorder, the system gets confused and it attacks healthy tissue to keep the host safe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So for an avoidant individual, the brain's emotional immune system misidentifies love and closeness as a foreign threat.
Because of that early template?
Exactly. If you grew up in an environment where relying on someone else was emotionally dangerous, your nervous system learned that vulnerability leads to pain.
So it fights it off.
Yes. In adulthood, when a partner attempts to get close, the parasympathetic nervous system initiates a shutdown response. It attacks the connection to protect the host.
Wow.
You go cold, you pull away,
Mm.
and then you label it independence to rationalize the isolation.
And the tragedy of that mechanism is that you successfully protect yourself from being hurt, but you build a wall so thick that you also protect yourself from ever being loved.
Yeah. The isolation is complete.
Which brings us to a massive pitfall that the source material warns about, which it essentially frames as the insight trap.
Ah, yes. The illusion that simply understanding your psychology is enough to change it.
Right. So what does this all mean? If I read all the literature, I listen to this analysis, and I perfectly diagnose my own attachment style as anxious or avoidant, the source is telling me I haven't actually fixed anything.
Nope.
It explicitly states that the work is not insight alone, and knowing your style does not change your style, which honestly feels incredibly frustrating for anyone who thinks they can outread their relationship problems.
Well, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at how modern society consumes mental health information.
Right.
Because we live in an era of unprecedented access to psychological vocabulary.
Yeah, everybody's on TikTok diagnosing themselves.
Exactly. People are exceptionally skilled at intellectualizing their behavior. But intellectual understanding happens almost exclusively in the prefrontal cortex. That's the logical reasoning part of the brain.
Okay.
These attachment patterns, however, do not live in the prefrontal cortex.
Where do they live?
They are entrenched in the limbic system and the body's autonomic nervous system.
So you cannot logic your way out of a survival response?
Exactly.
You can't just tell your amygdala to stop producing cortisol because you read a really good book about attachment theory.
That is exactly the issue. Insight is a map, but reading a map doesn't mean you've driven the car.
Right.
According to the CHC overview, what actually moved the needle is practicing a different response in real time in the midst of a trigger. And usually that requires professional support.
Okay.
The brain needs a safe, regulated environment to physically practice a new reaction when that perceived threat of closeness occurs.
And that is why the source specifically highlights therapeutic frameworks designed for this exact rewiring process.
Right.
Like it outlines emotionally focused therapy, or EFT, which is heavily used for couples.
Mm-hmm.
It also brings up schema-informed work and trauma-focused therapy for when these patterns trace back to specific crystallized events.
Yeah.
Let's look at the mechanics of these. How does emotionally focused therapy actually bridge that gap between knowing you have a pattern and changing the nervous system's response?
So EFT works because it doesn't just talk about the past. It triggers the attachment panic in the present moment, right inside the therapy room.
Wait, they trigger it on purpose.
Mhm. Well, the therapist tracks the couple's interaction until they hit that familiar loop. Say the anxious partner demands attention and the avoidant partner shuts down.
Oh, so they let the argument start.
Yes, but instead of letting that fight play out the way it has, 1,000 times before at home, the therapist freezes the room.
Yeah, okay.
They force the brain to stay in that intense discomfort, holding the tension.
Wow.
And then they actively guide the partners to reach out to each other from a place of vulnerability rather than defense. It literally forces the brain to fire a new neural pathway while under stress.
It's essentially exposure therapy for intimacy.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
You have to feel the panic of the trigger and then experience surviving it without using your old background app.
Yes.
And schema-informed work operates on a similar foundational level for individuals, right?
Yes, it does. Schema therapy focuses on identifying the rigid cognitive blueprints, or the schemas, that were constructed during childhood. So if your core schema is, I will inevitably be abandoned, your brain will filter all incoming data to prove that schema true.
It's looking for evidence.
Constantly. So the therapy involves actively dismantling that cognitive architecture and replacing it, often using experiential techniques where the patient learns to reparent the vulnerable parts of themselves.
Oh, wow.
And then trauma-focused work specifically targets the fragmented memories that locked the autonomic nervous system into that chronic state of fight, flight, or freeze in the first place.
Which naturally leads us to the systemic hurdle that underpins all of this.
Right.
Because if the only way to genuinely rewrite these deeply ingrained neural pathways is real-time practice with highly specialized licensed support, how is the average person supposed to get that? Because traditionally, accessing an EFT specialist or a trauma-focused clinician has been prohibitively expensive.
Very expensive.
It's limited to major urban centers.
Yeah.
And they have massive wait lists.
It's a huge barrier. And this is where the source material transitions from theory to a structural solution. Because the necessity of a licensed clinician is paramount here.
Yeah.
A professional is needed to assess the complete clinical picture.
Right.
Someone might assume their hypervigilance is purely an anxious attachment style, but a clinician can identify if there's an underlying clinical anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
Or untreated depression that's amplifying the relational issues.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, untangling that requires specialized training.
And this is exactly why the operational model of coping and healing counseling, the CHC provider detailed in our source, is just so compelling. Because they have fundamentally engineered their practice to remove the traditional barriers to this kind of specialized care.
Right.
Like first, they built this comprehensive team of over 15 licensed therapists. And that includes licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists.
Yeah.
But the delivery method is the true structural shift here. They operate as a 100% telehealth IPA compliant practice covering all 159 counties in the state of Georgia via secure video.
Right. And by entirely removing the geographical barrier, they are democratizing access to specialized therapeutic interventions.
Yeah.
Because in the traditional model, if you live in a rural or medically underserved county, your access to a culturally competent clinician who's trained in complex trauma or attachment theory is, virtually zero.
It just doesn't exist.
No.
Oh.
So telehealth fundamentally alters the landscape of mental health equity.
Yeah.
Furthermore, there is actually a paradoxical clinical advantage to telehealth, particularly for avoidant individuals.
Oh, wait, really? Hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So engaging in therapy requires profound vulnerability, right?
Right.
Which triggers the avoidant nervous system to shut down.
Right.
But if they're engaging in therapy through a screen, while physically located in the safety of their own home, their nervous system might actually remain regulated enough to do the work.
Oh, wow. The physical distance ironically allows for greater emotional proximity.
Exactly. It creates a buffer that lowers the initial threat response.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And beyond the geographical and clinical advantages, the CHC model actively dismantles the financial barriers that prevent long-term healing. The source material outlines a pricing structure that is almost unheard of in specialized private practice.
The financial accessibility is just staggering. I mean, for patients on Medicaid, the copay is completely covered. It's $0.
Yeah.
And for commercial insurance plans like Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, the out-of-pocket cost for a session ranges between $10 and $40.
Which is incredible.
It is, because when we talk about neuroplasticity and the requirement of real-time practice to rewrite attachment patterns, we are talking about consistency.
Exactly.
You cannot undo 30 years of an anxious attachment loop in like 3 sessions.
No, absolutely not.
You need regular ongoing support. So structuring a practice where the financial burden is minimized makes that long-term consistency an actual reality for the average person, rather than a luxury reserved for the wealthy.
It directly addresses the systemic failure of the traditional mental health model. Insight is free. You can find it in a book or on the internet.
Right.
But the real-time relational practice required to change the nervous system requires an accessible professional.
Yeah.
Additionally, the source emphasizes that CHC prioritizes a diverse, culturally competent team.
Yeah.
Which, when we look at the neurobiology of safety, cultural competence isn't just a buzzword. It is a clinical necessity.
Oh, 100%. Because if you have to spend half your session explaining your cultural background, your family structure, or your community norms to a
Yeah.
therapist who just doesn't share or understand your lived experience,
You're wasting time.
right, you aren't actually doing the attachment work.
Precisely. The brain cannot enter a state of deep emotional rewiring if it feels misunderstood or subtly judged by the practitioner.
Right.
To practice new, terrifying emotional responses, the patient has to feel fundamentally seen. A diverse team with varied clinical licenses means a patient can find the precise practitioner who can provide that foundational safety.
And their scope of practice reflects an understanding of how these patterns permeate every stage of life. The source notes they cover individual therapy, couples, family, and critically teen therapy starting at age 13, alongside life coaching.
Yeah.
And their specialties range from anxiety and depression to trauma, PTSD, grief, and relationship stress. Addressing these attachment templates at age 13 before decades of relational damage have compounded is a profound intervention.
It's huge.
Yeah.
There's a difference between pulling weeds in a fully overgrown garden versus tending to the soil as the seeds are just beginning to sprout.
That's a great analogy. So to synthesize what we've unpacked from the CHC overview, the foundational message is that your relationship struggles are not an indictment of your character.
Right.
You are running outdated software regarding the cost of closeness. It's a transactional economy you learned as a child to survive.
Yes.
And whether that software outputs an anxious panic over a perceived loss of connection or an avoidant retreat masquerading as stoic independence, it is a learned pattern, not a fixed personality trait.
And we cannot simply read our way out of these patterns.
Right.
The insight trap gives us the illusion of progress, but intellectualizing our trauma does not rewrite the nervous system.
No.
We require real-time relational practice in a regulated environment to forge new neural pathways.
Which is exactly why structural solutions like coping and healing counseling are just so vital. By utilizing a telehealth model that spans every county in Georgia and prioritizing financial accessibility, they're taking the specialized work of emotionally focused therapy and trauma recovery out of the exclusive urban centers and delivering it directly to the people who need it most.
Yeah, and, when we pull all of this together and look at the broader implications, it leaves us with something quite profound to consider regarding the future.
Oh, I always appreciate a lingering thought. What stands out to you?
Well, we have established that our current attachment patterns are the hidden cost of closeness that we inherited, right?
Yeah.
The old survival-based currency of connection.
Yeah.
But when an individual makes the active choice to sit down and do this difficult physiological work to shift their pattern, when they stop demanding anxious reassurance, or when they finally lower their avoidant fortress and tolerate being seen,
Yeah.
what is the new emotional currency they are minting for the future?
Wow.
By doing the painful work of changing our own neurological templates today, are we quietly rewriting the hidden blueprints that the next generation will inherit tomorrow?
Man, if we can endure the discomfort of changing our own background maps, the people who come after us might just inherit a system that actually knows how to connect.
Exactly.
That is an incredible thought to end on.